wonderful, LaRue. Will you just introduce us into this section, please?
I think so. Well, colleagues, welcome back and thank you for rejoining. And I see we have more people joining, as we go along. Between Susanne and myself, we are very grateful to the team of Millennium. They keep us on a very tight schedule. If this, I think, depended on me and you, Susanne, we would still be chatting away on the backstage function.
Yes.
So, colleagues, our second session, and this is really, I think, where the work will be done, Susanne.
Yeah.
And the self-reflection and the exploration will be done. And if we recap to our first session, you will recall that apart from the lovely introductions from Professor Robert Balfour and also then the celebration of language videos, we then discussed the various language sets that we each have, we each use, the extent of our language repertoires, and that some of us may only have perhaps a few languages in our repertoire, some of us might have more. The extent to which we have these languages and use them also differs, Our proficiency levels can differ. So you might know a language in its totality, so you can read and write and engage in the language, or you might only know snippets of the language, little words, little phrases.
Yeah.
And then we took you through a practical session where you created your own language portrait. So you had the option to either print it out and do it by hand, or you could do it then digitally within the paint function that we showed you. And I hope, Susanna, I hope that they brought their portraits along with them.
Yes.
But luckily you have, I think, a vast repertoire of portraits to share in your case.
Yes.
And that also illustrates how people, not only part of this session, but also people part of previous research, had experienced language, had interpreted language. So, Susanne, I think is there a little forward from you as well? The majority of the session will belong to you, and then I will do the background.
You are present and you are doing the profiles first, am I right?
Yes, it's first the profiles.
So I want to just ask everyone exactly as you have said, get your portrait ready, have it in front of you, and like a good reflection session, as LaRue says, a lot of this work will happen in your mind, and we hope to see your Q's and A's in the Q&A part and the chat part where you want to make comments. LaRue, but I think you can progress with those profiles.
Good, thank you, Susanne. So, colleagues, I see we welcomed some more members, so that's good. As Susanne said, if you have any questions or comments, you please use the chat function or in the Q&A function. Susanne and I will make turns to swap and check if there are any questions, and then we address them as we move along. So, we have welcomed you back. Now, colleagues, beforehand, we identified a few internal members to the university who we had invited to the session and also accepted to complete a short survey or short questionnaire. And we will not use this for any research purposes. This is purely to illustrate within our current session how language diversity can even be, visible within such a small group of people. We had 20 participants in total who contributed, which is a very small number, so it's not statistically significant. But I think it should, to me at least, it reflects very clearly the variation of language and also the patterns that we previously discussed, how the home languages relate to identity and how they're usually dispersed. Then you have your linking languages or your working languages, your English, and then so it goes on. And then it also tests something which is quite interesting to me, and that is the view on languages, specifically as South Africans, not as global citizens, but as South African citizens, in how we within our inherently diverse nation view language. So let's move then to our first question. Now, if we perhaps first just give you a recap, you will recall from session 1, we are now in session 2, and we will now do the first line, to be our language portraits. But I will take you through. Then the second part of that will be Susanne's portion where we discuss the language portraits. That includes previous research as well as portraits that were completed for this specific section. Then there is a hidden 2.5 where we will share with you some interviews that Susanne had done with Aubrey Masango at Radio 702 in 2019. those interviews, quite clearly articulate, or not articulate, but they're a very good example to me, Susan, in how
Mm,
develop African languages, perhaps a terminology that has not existed, but you take components of the language and you then create the phrase or the terminology within the African language. We have three languages there: Zulu, Sepedi, and Sesotho, if I recall.
yes.
And then 3 and 4 will then be just the governance oversight, the teaching and learning component, which the son will address, and then the student life component, which I will take for us. Good.
And right at the end, we'll invite 4 of our colleagues who have previously in other projects done portraits, and we've asked them a few questions to reflect in conclusion with us. So they will sort of wrap up our session as well today.
Yes. Okay. So, colleagues, the first one, this will now be familiar to you who participated in the small profile. To my mind, this is quite straightforward. So you will see that this little pie chart focuses on 20 participants and their home languages. So this is the language they speak in the home. They speak this with their family members, their children, their parents, their grandparents. And, we follow the color charts here. So we have 11 Afrikaans home language speakers, 3 who identify with English as the home language, 3 who identify with Tswana as the home language, 1 that is Tsonga or Shongang, and then 2 that have the Southern Sotho indicated as their home language. So, even here, it's not a homogeneous group in and of itself, but, keep this in mind as we now go along. Then we tested the second variation, and this asked that apart from the languages identified here, so your first component, indicate to us what other languages you use in the home. And note the variation. So you'll see that English immediately shoots up from where we had it at 2 or 3 people previously. It now goes immediately to 11. You'll see Afrikaans now also becomes an additional language that people might use. And then you see the Southern Sotho, the Northern Sotho come in, and then you see components of 3 Zulu speakers, Xhosa speakers, Venda speakers, and Tswana speakers. So immediately your mix for the additional languages used in the home becomes a lot more diverse. So Susan, this I think immediately indicates that the participants, those 20, though this was quite a mod, this was diverse, but it was fixed to certain groups. It immediately singles that, or shows that there is a multilingual, a multilingual facet to the participants.
Absolutely. Also, and that the whole notion of the home language or the mother tongue. Yes, there's a language that people self-identify with, but there are more languages entering the home space as well.
And then, colleagues, we then went a bit further. This now relates to what we discussed under the language sets. So that notion of languages, it's in its entirety. You can read, write, speak, and engage in the language, perhaps even learn in the language. Well, I think you can learn in the language, it depends on variation. But then the language where you perhaps only know snippets thereof, or just components thereof, perhaps that which you can only hear, but you cannot necessarily speak. And here, Susan, then you immediately see the diversity shoots up. So that nearly all participants, only 19 out of 20 can speak English. Afrikaans goes up to 18. Northern Sotho is at 7. Southern Sotho comes in. Swati then starts to feature. Ndebele starts to feature. Even your European languages of French, German, and Dutch, that also starts to feature. So the moment, we apply a more, can we say, a more liberal approach to the languages, then the language diversity and the multilingualism comes to the fore, and that the participants inherently know more than one language, which I think is something to be expected of South Africans.
Yes, absolutely. And the mix as well, exactly as you say, Leroux, all of a sudden our Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana speakers, Southern Sotho, Northern Sotho speakers, so people are saying, yes, I have a home language, and there are some other languages I might use in the home, but I have additional languages absolutely in the repertoire. And that's a very nice mix. And as you say, the European languages not so prominent, the Dutch, the French, the German, some Portuguese as well. no Spanish in this group, but they are also present there. Yes.
And, I think, Susan, to remember that there's only 20 people. It's only 20 people we measured here. This is not 100 people. It's only 20 people.
Yeah.
So, colleagues, we then tested how did you learn the languages? So, in what sequence did you learn them? And you'll see this reflects basically the third slide, more or less. I think there's one variation for English and Tswana that is different. But the home languages, with the exception of English and Setswana, were the first languages learned. You'll recall we had previously had 3 Tswana home language speakers.
Yeah.
But that speaker now indicated that this is not the first language, or the language first learned.
Learned, yes.
And then in 4 now indicate that English was the first language. So it would seem that Tswana speaker learned the English first and then came with the Tswana. So this mirrors, and I think that's logical as well. It's your home language you learn first. You learn it from your mother, your father, your siblings, your grandparents. So that is a logical connection.
Yeah.
But then we go into the second languages and the third languages, and here comes the change. Now, Susan, what is most interesting to me, at least, is the second language.
Yes.
Specifically English. There it again signals that linking language. It's the work language. So it's usually the language we learned second.
Yeah.
So this was most likely in the school setting.
Yes.
Or it can have come from, dependent on the age of the participants. We did not test that, but it can come from entertainment.
Yeah.
The media you see, the social media, radio, television, the like. But then you see the second languages, then also have a strong feature of 4 African languages and a small component of Afrikaans as a second language.
Yes. So the Tswana, Zulu, Northern Sotho-Venda learn the second languages, yes.
And then you move to your third language. And then English suddenly drops. So English, then, it's no longer then the tool. This, I think, is perhaps more societal or social language. So then you see your Zulu strongly in 3 participants, your Xhosa and your Southern Sotho and your Afrikaans is 2 participants, and then 1 each for your Northern Sotho, your Tswana, and your English. So here your mix then becomes a bit more diverse. I think the participants then expanded their language repertoires with friends, perhaps.
Yeah.
And
families, sometimes, where there are marriages between, say, Setswana and Sesotho people or Setswana Zulu people. That also then, your extended family also helps you to expand your Afrikaans English, Afrikaans Sotho, whatever. You expand your repertoire with your family as well.
Yeah, and we also did not test this with a specific age. So we did not ask at what age did you learn this. So I think, there are so many variables that can influence this, but that you'll see now if we go to 4 and 5 languages. Naturally, there's a diminishment in the number of languages. So it seems the majority of our participants, if my math does not fail me, have 2 languages, and then a few
12 of them had learned a third. Yeah.
And then we drop.
Yes.
4th and 5th languages.
11 had a 4th, learned a 4th, and 4, 5, 6, 8 learned a 5th. That makes a lot of sense.
So you see, colleagues, that the repertoires then also vary. So you have perhaps your 2 essential, your 3 essential, and then the rest. Not that they are perhaps less essential, but then these are then often, Susan, you can confirm the more languages that the snippets of, the little pieces of, that you use to cross over between. And here you now see the stronger flavor of Portuguese, you see the German, you see more Dutch coming into the play.
Yeah.
But then still the African languages remain prevalent. Your Zulu remains there, and I think Zulu remained throughout. It never dropped off the scale. It remained a predominant language that was learned.
Yeah.
And that probably links back to it being the largest language group.
The largest language group, and definitely also a growing speech community in Gauteng, which is traditionally a Sotho and a Setswana, if you link it to Northwest space. But we also see the lingering effects of apartheid, because Afrikaans also remains in those repertoires, often because it's a language that one can take easily at school. So it's interesting to see how how history also lingers
Yes, within the languages we still use or the way they are constructed.
Yeah.
And then, Susan, I was quite grateful when I saw the results here. And we tested and asked the question, how many languages should South Africans learn?
Yeah.
And luckily, no one said only one. So all the participants either said the home language plus one or then more.
Yes.
And the majority focused on uh, the two additional languages. So you should have three languages in total. Now, I think we didn't test, should it be only complete proficiency, or is it then scaling upwards? I think that can also be an interesting test if you were to do that. But we say that 8 participants felt that a home language plus 2 additional languages, 4 felt a home plus 1 additional, 3 felt that 3 additional languages to the home is important, and 5 felt that 4 additional languages would be important in relation to the home.
Yeah.
So at least I think we are working with an open-minded group who understands that more than one language is indeed beneficial, and I think it's perhaps a requirement in diverse community.
Exactly. If you're a true South African, that's what this question tries to get at. What would a true South African? So, LaRue, you are raising many issues here which we shouldn't go into because we'll go into a tangent. But you are right. This doesn't necessarily mean proficiency at let's say literacy and oral. We can say vernacular and literate functions. This doesn't mean necessarily literacy in all of the languages, but this is the typical profile. I think Johan asked a question in the first session. Johan, I've got your surname now.
It's large.
Yes, and he asked, so would these profiles remain the same? Are they going to change over time? And what this is showing me, if I link that to the data I've gathered on the VAL in 2020, 2015, and 2010, where I've asked the same question to VAL Vanderbijl Park campus students of Northwest. The profiles look exactly the same. Now, another can of worms I don't want to open necessarily is your answer to a questionnaire never means behavior. We can't equate my response to a questionnaire to something I will necessarily do. So we keep that in mind as well. This is a perception that people are expressing, and they also, but it's a perception that aligns with the reality of being a South African. So, but never equate this perception necessarily with,
the direct behavior.
Yes, yes.
Well, I think, Susan, that then also links to the reasons, because we asked what reasons. So, these remain anonymous, but colleagues, we did take some of your words, but
yes,
gutted them slightly. But I mean, the reasons we got many reasons, and some were paragraphs long, some were only 2 words or 3 words.
Yeah.
But Susan, I think they all converge to the same aspect, and the first one says converse with diverse South Africans. So immediately the cultural diversity comes there to the fore. It provides you with more opportunities. I think that the linking thing comes up here again. It's a tool to access perhaps more information, job opportunities, social opportunities. You brought up the intercultural marriages. It opens that opportunity.
Yeah.
Then again, we come with the cultural differences. It's the bridge in between. And that links to the last bullet, the mutual respect and understanding that, you go out of your way and vice versa to understand and include one another.
Yes.
And then again, it comes, understand the diverse nature of our culture.
Mm.
And then one of my personal favorites was, help you surviving out there, because really it is sometimes you are out there on your own and you need these tools to bridge the gaps.
It's a beautiful, beautiful contribution. Yes.
So, and these were, I only took 6 out of the 20,
Yeah.
but all of them remain in the same tangent. So it seems that's, or to me at least, that this group of 20 South Africans is on sort of the same page.
Yeah.
And how they regard the importance there, what's the reason behind it. I don't recall anything that was not fitting within that scope of diversity and inclusivity. So I think that perhaps signals positively also.
Yes, it does. And I want to sort of just raise one difference. If you think about India and Africa as India as a country and Africa as a continent, this is where we differ from European nation states. If you think about being German means speaking German, living in the country, and being part of the nation. And if you think, I'm not sure, I think it is true in Germany, but it's definitely true in the Netherlands. If you want to become a citizen, you must pass a language exam. So it's one of the most important markers of being ready to enter the Dutch society is the ability to speak Dutch. Now, try and just picture that for a moment in the South African context. What would we expect migrant people who become part of the South African nation? What language will we ask them to be good at? Or will we ask them about 11? That's not really possible or fair, maybe. So, the point I want to drive is social cohesion in Indian and African contexts is linked to multilingualism, to exactly what these people are saying, to be able to converse with a diverse group of people, to bridge cultural differences, to understand diverse nature, to have mutual respect and understanding, to help you survive out there. That's in a very complex context. So for Europeans, it's very strange when I say, and what Ayubam Borge actually said in the 90s already, he said, a well-integrated African person is a multilingual person. While in the Dutch context, they would say, leave your Afrikaans at home if you migrate here, leave your Moroccan languages, leave your Turkish, you must become Dutch. So it's a very different view on social cohesion and social integration. The link between, exactly, the link between language and social cohesion and unity is very different for us if we compare it to, and there's a good reason for it. The European nation states were formed in a particular historical way, political history, etc. But they struggle to understand this, that we say, to be well integrated, a good South African must know many languages.
Okay, so colleagues, I think Susan, the next one is we then move over into our reflections,
The portraits, yes.
into the portraits. But I think if we look at the profiles, I think it's encouraging that even in such a small group,
Yeah.
and a group which was it had a very strong home language component to one language.
Yes.
That importance and understanding for multilingualism, it would seem, is inherently within the subconscious of the participants themselves.
Exactly.
It's not an adverse view that it should be solely monolingual and that is the only thing we will have. It has the participants. There's an openness towards the inclusivity rather than only conforming to one language group. We are open to more possibilities.
Yes, yes, definitely. And in conclusion on this section, Lulu, from my side, it confirms the picture I'm seeing as a researcher across the projects that I've been doing since 2000. This has not changed.
So it has a long history of
Yes.
proof, you're saying, in essence, scientific proof.
Yeah.
Okay, Susan, I then take the back seat.
Thank you for helping me with the slides, Leroux. I appreciate. We will look at, I want to do two things now, and I'm looking at the time. It's 14:25. So I want to spend about 10 minutes on number one. So I want to ask those of you who did your portraits in the previous session, remember we asked you to please bring them along. We will show you some other portraits just after this first reflection session as well. But we want you to now please look at your portrait, and then I will ask you some questions, and questions which you should try and answer to yourself, and if you are willing to maybe add comments for us in the chat function or in the Q&A function, which we will check. And then the second 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I want to, no, say 10 minutes, reflect on some portraits that were provided before this session. People who gave us permission to anonymously use some of their portraits as a discussion point. And then, LaRue, we want to go into that audio part, little part that illustrates what we call a multilingual pedagogy. And yeah, well, the brilliance of a person like Aubrey Masango is just, he must have one of the quickest minds in the country. It was really interesting to be in his presence. And then to go into our policy. In other words, trying to say we've now reflected on the multilingual nature of our people, even people who are traditionally bilingual. I think Afrikaans people could be described as bilingual, Afrikaans, English. Some of them have heritage languages and some of them added African languages. And then African people with African home languages, I mean, who are mostly multilingual, meaning 4 or 5 languages. And what does that mean for our policy? So that's where we want to drive our conversation. Larusa, if you can go to the next slide, please. I want all of us, and maybe you can just in the chat function type, which language did you put in the head? Maybe I want to ask you, write down the name of that language, say it was Sesotho, and then just head Sesotho. I want you to, in the chat function, just type in which languages and give me the name of a language that you put in the head of your portrait. I'm going to give about, say, 30 seconds or so. I will also type, but I don't want to. I want you to write. If you look at your portrait, Lelani, I'm waiting for you to type. What did you put in the head? And I see Nkosinati is in the room. So Lelani had 3 languages in the head: Afrikaans, English, Sesotho. Thanks, Lelani. Nkosinati had English. Good. Vincent, what did you have in the head? Marina also had 3: Afrikaans, English, German. Good. Corey, I see you had English and Afrikaans. Puso, 2 languages, Setswana and English. Vincent had his English in his head. Good. Tokia had 3 as well. Setswana, Sepedi in English. Good. Languages in the head. I am very happy with what we've seen. So on the one hand, there is, if one language is put in the head, very often it's English. But what I like about the group again is, Leroux, as you said, it's not only the English in the head, but also the languages like Setswana, Sepedi, Afrikaans, German, etc. So the question I want to ask, and Leroux, if we reflect for a moment, what is the significance of, if we now think about the language portrait and place? Thank you, Jean-Marie. I see the head was English, the heart was Afrikaans, and in the hands both. Okay. But we'll show you some similar portraits just now. But if you think about interpreting the language portrait, and this is not a research methodology training session, but I want people to think about, why do we put things in the head? Why do we put them in the heart or the torso? And why do we put things in the hands or the feet or the legs? So one way of philosophically interpreting portraits is that there is a difference between the central parts and the peripheral parts. So when I look at interpretations of portraits, I always try to see central organs like the brain and the heart, the torso part. Which languages do people put there? And which languages do they put in the peripheral spaces? Like your pinky, for example, or your little toe, or your big toe, or your toes in general, which you hide in shoes sometimes. So which languages do you hide, on your feet? You have them, but you don't show them maybe. So what I want to say about the head is, there is this misperception. Well, wait, let me put it this way. What I'm seeing in my research is very often your languages of education are put in the head. And it makes sense. That is the place where you cognitively are busy. But we make the assumption that it's only English that's in the head. And that is wrong. So that's why I'm so glad that I'm seeing the comments of colleagues who are participating saying, there are more languages in the head. And there are these three reasons for putting languages in the head that I'm finding. And I've looked at LaRue, we will have 5,000 portraits captured soon. So I'm going to try and look across 5,000 portraits. What we are seeing is the first reason for putting languages in the head is the cognitive function. I am using my brain. It's the language of thinking. It's the language of conceptualizing. The second reason for the brain is it's the language which is automatic to me. So that was interesting when we looked at which language did you learn first, second, third. That doesn't mean it's your strongest first, second, and third language, but which one did I start with? Usually that one sometimes is in the head as well because it's automatic. There's no processing needed. That's why I'm putting that one in the brain. If I need it, it's there. And the third reason is the opposite of number two. It is such a difficult language and I'm so struggling with it that I'm very aware of my processing. And that's why it's in the brain. So that I think is a very interesting reason for putting things in the head. I want to ask you guys to next write in the chat function, what did you put in the heart? Which languages did you put in the heart? And if it is your home language, the heart or the torso part, just indicate whether it's a home language or not. Dolly, I see your English is in the feet, and I'd love to have a conversation about that. We'll come to feet and hands just now. But which languages did you put in the heart? And if it is the home language or the mother tongue, just indicate that as well. All right, so Sharonika says yes, Afrikaans and English in the heart, but it is the home language. And Postinati says home language, Xhosa, Afrikaans and Zulu. Setswana for Dokia, the home language in the heart. Renee says the heart, Afrikaans. Dolly says the Setswana, the head and the heart. Dolly, that makes a lot of sense. And Afrikaans for Lelani as well. And that's what I also typically see across the portraits that I study, is the languages of identity. LaRue, you've explained it so well this morning, those languages of cultural identity.
Yes.
They are in the heart very often, where people say, this is the language that I love. This is the language that forms part of my identity. And now I want to get to the arms, the hands, and the legs and the feet. You can maybe just say, arms, hands, legs, feet. We are seeing, Dolly says my Setswana, or rather my English was in my feet. Dolly, if you can maybe type why, just why did you put English in the feet? And if other colleagues can just say what languages did you put in the arms or the hands or the legs or the feet? Let's just see, Dolly, if you can write why English in the feet. Sharonika also says so Zulu is in the feet. Vincent, yes, you said your hands. Sign, yes, very nice symbol signing. Sign language. I'm so glad, Vincent, you're bringing sign language to the table.
Susan, do we then assume that this relates back to that language being a tool, taking you places or working with things?
Absolutely, what I see in the metaphors that people use, yes. So they would say, LaRue, but you get the most beautiful metaphors where people say, I put maybe my sutu in my arms because it helps me to get closer to people in my environment. So that whole idea of hug,
Yeah.
of gathering people, hands definitely also as a tool. It helps me to get the job done. You know, those metaphors of tool and job. And then feet and legs, definitely mobility, taking me places, making me go places. Prof. Dolly is saying they are a lower part of the body. Yes, it's my second language, not as important as Setswana and Sotho, but it does give me motion. Yes, Dolly, yes, movement. Yes. But interesting point that Prof. Dolly is raising, and that is something I still have to actually check across the data sets. Sometimes people do put exactly as Prof. Dolly has said here, the language I learned first in the head, second in the middle, and then lower down. So that's also an order or a
No, I
structure.
like you.
Yes, a hierarchy. Yes, Leroux, which people use. Yeah. Um, I love you, Prof. Dolly. I promote you today.
But Susan, do you find it in other spaces as well, like knees or ankles
Yes.
or hips?
Yes. Some of the most interesting places I've that people have used, an English mother tongue speaker who is actually quite multilingual, because English mother tongue speakers in South Africa generally are not the most multilingual population. They learn the Afrikaans that they learn very poorly, and they sort of never want to use it either. But this person had the Afrikaans and had Afrikaans family as well, so she was quite good at it. And then she added the Zulu that she learned as a baby in her elbow, a little piece of lime green in the elbow. And she said, I learned this as a baby when I was about 3, 4 years old. And then we moved out of the KwaZulu-Natal region, and I basically lost that little bit of Zulu I had. But like your elbow, if you hit it, you feel pain, you become aware. So she says, my missing of Zulu is like me hitting my elbow and realizing that my Zulu isn't there. So yes, people are amazing if you allow them time to use this metaphor of the body. I've seen the knees, both things, where people say, it's my weakest part of my body. I have pain. My knees bring me pain. That's why this language is there. It's a difficult language for me. And you also see, I've seen an appendicitis where a person has said, it's something I don't need. I can live without my appendicitis. But if it's there, it doesn't bother me. For this person, it was the Afrikaans, Swati, and another language, which is his seventh, eighth, ninth languages. So he said, it doesn't bother me. I can live without them. But actually, if they are there, I can use them. So yes, people use and the face sometimes is used for identity. People would say, I put say Afrikaans is your home language, Afrikaans on the face, because it's who people see when they see me first. So very interesting. You think about other questions. I quickly check the chat function.
Your Karabo has written to us.
Karabo says, yes. When you walk, yes, talk to a man in his language. Yes, it goes to your heart. Yes. Feet, it helps me grounded. Yeah, I see that as well. Lelani has written, it anchors one. Yes. It's about both. Dolly is asking, is it about liking, loving, or about proficiency? It's about both. It's that little bit of language. So sometimes, Dolly, people reflect that in the place on the silhouette. They would put a language in their pinky, and they would say, I'm putting it in my little finger because that's how little I know of the language. So sometimes people are very aware of their proficiencies. I've coded that with Atlas TI in terms of micro and macro perceptions of proficiency. The Zulu culture, the earth, the roots, and that's why I chose the feet. Yeah. Yes.
So it's very practical, Susan, it's very practical and often personal connections that they make to these languages. And, even Sharonika, it's a maternal family. So
yes,
it does not necessarily include her directly, but that link stayed within the
Yes.
family line.
Yes, absolutely. And that grandmother has transferred that link. That grandmother has transferred that respect, and that love and that liking. So the emotional part has been transferred, maybe not the language. So that's a very interesting thing that Dolly is saying. Are we talking about proficiency, or are we just talking about attitudes towards? Now, that's the point you and I made. These remain perceptions of people. I've done a test in 2000 where I've asked people's perceptions about the proficiency of the languages that they know on a scale. You know, how good do you write this? 1 to 10, 10 being the best or very good, read, etc. And then I've made them I asked them to write a proficiency test. I only did this for English. And it was very interesting that there are discrepancies between perceptions of proficiency and real proficiency as tested on a test. And I don't want to go into too complicated theories here, but the issue was the more proficient one is in something, and that is not only language, that is with bodily tasks like high jumping and stuff like that. The more proficient you are, the better you are able to judge your level of proficiency. If you are not proficient enough in any task, your perception of your proficiency is random. You could either overestimate your proficiency or underestimate your proficiency. So that's why I'm very careful when I interpret not only this, but also questionnaires, always reminding myself, this is a perception, this is an attitude. I'm expressing a desire, and not necessarily reality. If you can just go to the next slide, Leroux, while I'm just reading. Renee is saying arms and feet. Oh, does body language count? Getting closer to people. Yes, sometimes it's in a language that's not spoken. That's an interesting one, Renee. I haven't seen anybody really indicating body language, neither in the articles that I've read on this as well. Interesting point you are making. The issue of the feet, Dolly is asking, what are we saying? Now, very important point Dolly is raising. What am I interpreting? That's not how the methodology works. That's why we are asking people to interpret their own portraits. I cannot interpret color. I'm not a psychologist. I am getting better at interpreting where people place things. But again, I'm not trained in art. I'm trained in language. So I use the language that people write to describe their own portraits. The language portrait methodology says only the person who creates the portrait can interpret the portrait. We are not supposed to try and read into it. We must use the words. So when you said, guys, we used your direct words, that's exactly what we are doing. We are not trying to understand from our perspective. So feet can be interpreted in many ways, depending on how the person reflected on it. If a person says, I put it in my feet because it's the least important part of my body, then obviously that language is not so important because I've put it in the least important part. But like Lulani has said, I put something in my feet because it grounds me. It's the foundation on which I walk. That indicates a very important language. So feet can, and every body part on the silhouette can be positive or negative, depending on how the people interpret it themselves. Karabo is saying, yes, we've touched, Karabo, that is one of my most important quotes as well. I just want to see, Dolly sê, Afrikaans is nie so sleg nie, sy praat dit net min. Daarom in jou klein vingertjie. Presies, Dolly, exactly. Therefore, in my little pinky. Yes, absolutely. My German and French, for example, which is also not well developed, I put in my stomach very often. Because these are languages I can only order food in foreign contexts. So that's, people have these associations with languages that they know. Leroux, I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but because you've touched on it so nicely, We've seen the number of languages in that little questionnaire. And when I show you guys some examples of the portraits, you will see how many languages are present. Dolly asked the question about proficiency. And no, we are saying a repertoire includes languages of which I know a very little bit and languages which I am fully proficient in terms of literacy and speaking. Do we use them for the same functions? No. We will see that in the portraits as well. What motivated people to learn these languages? That's the one question, LaRue, you handled at the end. Why? Why so many languages? And people would say to fit in, to handle diversity, to communicate across cultures. Are they linked to identity? Yes. But not to the same extent for all people. And there I want to make a distinction between individuals. It varies from individual to individual and from group to group if you perceive yourself to be part of a group. In general, in South Africa, for Afrikaans people, the language is a marker of Afrikaans identity. And I'm seeing the same link of salience between language and identity for Zulu people. I'm not seeing that same link so strongly for Sotho people. I'm seeing that Sotho people link much more strongly to the broader culture that includes the language. But they don't say, I'm only Sotho because I speak Sotho. That's what Afrikaans and Zulu people often say. So there are slight nuances in the strength, the saliency, the connection between language and identity in terms of groups and for individuals. Nkosinati is saying, what about the characters of specific languages in relation to the specific body part? You'll have to explain characters of languages to me. Nkosinati, please try and do that in the chat function. I am stupid at that one. You will teach us. LaRue, if you could go to the next slide.
Here we go.
Okay, now I don't, as I say, want to go into a lot of detail, but when I analyze portraits, this is typically what I do. I code which languages are called the home languages, which do people then regard as additional languages, heritage languages, and desired languages. So these languages that I aspire to know. And as LaRue said, remember that the group we worked with, if you look at the red numbers at the bottom in the total, the largest group of the participants for the portraits that we're talking about were Afrikaans or English. But even in this small group of about 5 people, we had 22 languages. So LaRue, again, confirming what your profile said. If we look at the next slide, what I wanted to just draw your attention to is this issue of place. But the moment I start to analyze by looking at what is the typical place for the home language, you can see clearly that it's the heart. And that's what we also discussed just now. And obviously it differs for people. Some other people put the home language in the hands or in the broader torso or in the tongue as well. And some people had it in both places, maybe the heart and the tongue, or the heart and the hands. So that's why there are 6 counts here and not just the 4 that I documented here. But the heart is prominent for the home language. The additional languages were very prominent in the brain and in the hands, if you look at that. Small numbers, but I'm just trying to look at a bit of a trend. And then if you look at the bottom line here, you see that the hands were prominent places and the legs as well. So heart, brain or head, hands and legs. And now I want to show you some examples of what people say when they talk about the heart, the brain, the hands. The colors, I just wanted to say, it's very difficult to talk about color because it's so personal. Something like orange is linked very clearly to the Dutch. And very often you would see people, if they have Dutch, they would make it orange. Yes, it's the color of the Netherlands, the Prince of Orange, etc., etc. But very few colors really are linked so closely to cultures or nations. So usually color is a very personal thing. So that makes it very difficult to interpret. So what I do is I analyze what people say, and I try to denote whether it's positive or negative. And not necessarily that English is blue or Afrikaans is yellow or Sotho is pink. That does not make sense, really. But I just wanted to show you the red, blue, green were prominent colors here.
Yeah, I'm assuming, Susan, that historical context can also inform the colors
Yes.
that people might associate from
Yeah.
perhaps personal past experience, but even historical
Yes.
past
So
experience.
flags are important. Very often people say, my English is red, white, and blue because it's the color, it represents the colors on the flag.
I think, Susan, if I just quickly touch on what you've
Yeah.
highlighted here in terms of the similarities and the prominency, this is what makes it such a vital tool for us in the co-curricular space, is that what this engagement or this type of reflection does is it sort, I wouldn't say it neutralizes, but it highlights the similarities and the similar associations, not identical.
Yes.
It shows that though your languages differ, you think and feel quite similarly
Exactly.
about them. Then
Exactly.
it becomes no longer a divisive tool, but
A
or a
binding.
barrier. It's a binding
Yes.
element that then comes to the fore, that mutual respect
Exactly.
and inclusivity.
Our experiences are the same. Yes. Very much. The next slide, Leroux, I think will be the first example. So this is the portrait of a person who's Afrikaans home language and who placed that Afrikaans in the heart, as you can see, and even drew the heart there and made it red. And what did the person say? I love Afrikaans. It's my mother tongue. It's my first language, home language. Look at all the links there with identity. The language I learned from birth. So not only identity, but also the one, Leroux, I learned first,
Yeah.
as you said. And then why red? It represents love. I love Afrikaans. I love my home language. If you show the next one, please, I wanted to link to this issue of heart. Very different context here. So English home language portrait. Italian is in the heart. English, I think, was this pink whole torso. Look at the clothing metaphor as well here. That's sort of my T-shirt. Italian is the desired language here. And desire obviously links to heart, links to love, links to red. So this person says, my fiance has Italian as his home language. And this language is such a big part of who he is. And he and his family speak Italian to each other. Since I love him, I place Italian in my heart to represent that association for me. So here is a person who says Italian is not something that I even speak, but it's something that is becoming part of my extended family through my fiance. And that's also why I put it in my heart. So not only the home language, but also the desired home language of the new extended family.
Yeah,
I
and that
thought,
links to what you said earlier, the intercultural marriages or relationships that then
yes,
allows this would not otherwise necessarily have happened.
exactly. Exactly. This person has stronger links to Afrikaans and German actually, and Dutch than to Italian. So it's you're quite right. That would not have happened if one hasn't broadened your family. Yeah. The next example, I want to go to head and just show you what you have already said to us in the chat. So this is an Afrikaans home language participant who says English is my additional language. I place this in my head, my tongue, my heart, and my hands. So just note that English is placed across all of those places, but I'm focusing on the head now. Because this person wrote, it's most of my professional life is conducted in English. So a lot of thought links to the brain, to the head, and spoken communication, my mouth, is done in English. So a very clear link between this additional language and the head. And blue signifies a flowing and a calming professional ideal. So for this person, blue means professionalism, a calm flow in the professional. If you look at the next slide, Leroux, I'm going to move to another example of the head. So for this person, isiXhosa is the home language, English is the additional language, and it's also placed in the head with a focus on the brain. So that link between cognitive processing is even made more explicit. I've chosen the head for English with the focus on the brain, as this is the language I use for my intellectual and professional alliances. And green symbolizes wealth, richness of knowledge. So again, linking to the head and the cognitive space of the head there. The next example, I think, is again a head example. This person is a Sotho home language person. Again, English is placed in the head. English is additional language. It's my working language in the head. And look at that link between work and life in the color. Red, because red is blood, and blood is life. If I don't have a job, I do not live. So very interesting. We see the additional language, English, in these portraits very prominently in the head. The next spaces, I think we'd move to hands. Yes. So Afrikaans, again, home language. Sign language, I think, is expressed here as a desired language. I put a question mark there because the person did not say it in his notes. I'm inferring this, and in a scientific publication, I would clearly state that the person hasn't said this. I'm inferring this, and I would have to explain why. So sign language can only be done using your hands, and that makes a lot of sense. And then the color purple linked to compassion and to understanding. So a nice example, somebody asked about body language. Sign language is very clear in this group of 4 or 5 portraits, because I think the next portrait also shows sign language. Yes, person is isiXhosa home language. Sign language is here called a desired language, and you'll see why I interpret it here without a question mark, and it's placed in the fingers. The fingers represent my appetite and willingness to learn the language. So this person has not yet learned this language either fully or extensively. So that's why I'm saying it's still a desired language in the portfolio of languages of this person. And red represents urgency and importance. Beautiful metaphor of the robot, red, orange, green. Red is that urgent color, or the color of fire stations, signs.
Yeah, and again, Susan, here, what you said, we cannot interpret ourselves what the color red means. The previous participant, I had a more loving association to red with the Italian and the fiance, whereas here it now becomes urgency and importance. So perhaps, a matter of success or failure, or life and death.
There's some threatening element. You're quite right. Yes, yeah, or that urgency, that it's important and not just a nice to have. There's an urgency to this. I think there's one more example. Yes, the Sotho home language person who says Portuguese is additional and desired, and it's placed in the leg with the color blue. And this person linked, I think Chivenda was the two socks at the feet are different colors, a darker blue and a lighter blue. And this person is, I'm putting it in the legs, or in this bottom part, because legs help each other. But then the color was important to me. So why blue? Because I link it to the sky. The sky is the limit. I can hear and understand a little Portuguese, but I want to speak it fluently, fully, read and write it. And that's why I say desired, because this person is saying I'm still growing in my proficiency.
Yeah, and here, Susan, so now this contrast then, the previous one said blue was a calming or assuring color.
Yes,
And
yes,
here it's more opportunity, this
yes.
metaphor, the sky is the limit.
Absolutely. So what my scholars, my friends, and I do when we try and interpret color is literally saying both of these concepts, opportunity and calm, they are positive. So we try to just say how many of these references to blue will link to positive experiences with languages. You do get the opposite, where somebody said, I think it was a reference to Afrikaans in one of the portraits I analyzed, where somebody said, Afrikaans is blue because it's like a blue Monday. It is such a difficult language to learn. I struggle with it. I feel like a blue Monday when I must go into Afrikaans.
Yeah.
So you can also have the exact opposite meaning for the same color.
No, so there's no fixed.
No inherent meaning to color. Seriously, and not even to place either. But this metaphor of the body is very productive. I've had a very critical scholar say to me, how does language and the body now link? I mean, you could also have used the metaphor of a house. And the person is quite right. A foundation, a roof, windows, that metaphor could also have worked well. But I was assured when I read work by Claire Cramsch from America. She is a German and French lecturer who has tried to teach Americans, who are the most monolingual people in the world. She was trying to teach them German and French at UCLA over her career. And every year when she finished her courses, she would ask students to write, learning a foreign language is like, and then she would have 3 dots. Speaking a foreign language is like, writing a foreign language is like. And then she analyzed those metaphors. And the metaphor that emerged the strongest was the metaphor of the body. So people would say, learning to speak German is like having a toothache, or having a stomach ache, or a sprained ankle. I can't move properly. So those metaphors of pain in the body and joy, it helped me to transcend my body, literally what people sometimes would say in those metaphors. So that made me comfortable, that helping people to reflect on the languages that they know in this metaphor of this human silhouette. It's not without empirical evidence. People do relate learning languages to bodily issues as well.
Yeah, and I think, Susan, from where I sit, at least in what we use this for, I think as opposed to the house, the silhouette makes it immediately a lot more personal.
Yes.
Because, I think each human being has a body, when last we checked, but in our context, perhaps not every individual has necessarily the normal house, the brick and mortar type of metaphor that you might have placed, or the vehicle type of metaphor.
Yes.
So this is the most relatable tool, perhaps,
yes,
that we have to catch a diverse group of people.
Exactly. And so human. I mean, it highlights, as you say, the similarity of experiences with languages across people. I think that would be my last slide. Let me just see. Yes. Obviously, we are inviting you guys to write the notes in the chat or post questions and answers. But Jackie, I'm also asking you to, if you go to the next slide while people write, Leroux, I have, Leroux, you want to do the audio first. Yes, I'm insane. Our people will be invited to stage at the end. You do audio first. But so Renee and Dolly here are concluding saying colors and place, very subjective. Absolutely. And that's exactly what Leroux has highlighted, that it's that personal interpretation. But the metaphors that people use to describe why they choose a specific place, those things can be compared across individuals. And I think that makes it such a useful such a useful tool for analysis in terms of how do people experience their multilingualism. Very, very nice. But you guys are right. We can't say English is blue or Zulu is yellow, or no, we can't. It's about only Dutch that I think people constantly link to orange, and that I've seen in the German context, the Dutch context, the South African and the Namibian context.
And the Soviets probably to red.
Maybe to red, but also English is linked to red. The English. So there, red is also not even. It can't be claimed by Russia.
Specific nation,
Yeah.
Okay, so Susan, do we now move to our not our videos, our audios of that?
Yes.
It's that they are perhaps, I don't think they're that long. I think we will manage quite easily to do them. But they focus, I think, Susan, if we give some context.
Yes.
This.
Let's give a bit of context here. Leroux, what I want to highlight is, and Dolly and those colleagues from languages in the room, they have started to train people at Northwest on a short course called a short learning program on multilingual pedagogies. And in 2019, on Heritage Day, I was invited by this amazing person, Aubrey Masangu, to be in an interview. And he talked about language, and he wanted to say, so what are we doing with languages, etc. And I tried to explain this concept of multilingual pedagogy to him and the readers, or the listeners, and he immediately understood where we were going. And I think Leroux provided one of the most beautiful examples of what we mean by a multilingual pedagogy in practice. So this is a really nice piece of audio for us, because we are moving into the policy part now.
Yes.
So Leroux is saying we're moving towards policies, and what do we do at Northwest? And this is an illustration of what Prof. Dolly and those people in the rest of the week are going to illustrate even more.
Yeah, and I colleagues, the phrasing here, or the phrase or the terminology that was translated or transposed, or developed, I should rather say, is the notion of constitutional democracy.
Yeah, so think about that. How would you express that if you're in the room, if you're a Tshivenda speaker? How would you say constitutional democracy if you're an Afrikaans speaker, a Zulu speaker? Yes.
Yeah, and I think, Susan, what this illustrated, and I think members should listen carefully to that, is this is not just direct translation. This is development. Listen to the comments that Aubrey gives in how they break up the words and their meaning and their interpretation to create the new formulation in the African language.
Yeah.
So we have 3 snippets, colleagues, so enjoy the listening. Here we go to the first one.
22.7 and 106 FM. Oh, I'm loving it. I'm really, really loving it. Just the contribution to the question that I asked. What would the vernacular, whatever your ethnic group is, for constitutional democracy? And I'm getting a lot of people who speak isiZulu coming back to me. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Love to hear from people who speak Tshivenda, people who speak Istsonga, people who speak Sesotho, people who speak isiXhosa. I'd like to hear from the queer languages. Please, what is constitutional democracy in those languages? So, for example, somebody is just in Pretoria says to me that constitutional democracy in South Africa is umthetho sisekelo wentando yeningi. Oh, yeah, beautiful, ne? Hey, all right. My guest is Susan Coutier, and she's Director Research Developer in the Faculty of Humanities at the Northwest University. Susan, beautiful conversation and a lot of reaction to the question we asked. And let me give you the word for constitutional democracy in isiZulu. Umthetho sisekelo wentando yeningi. Asatimoyini.
Dit is baie mooi, but you have to remember, I'm a Sotho girl from the Vaal.
All right, Susan, let's take a few calls. Kwe in Pretoria. Hi, Kwe.
Oh my God, it's Q.
Is it Q? I'm sorry. I've got.
Hi, Aubrey. How
Yeah,
are
how are you doing? I'm so sorry, Q. I think I'm. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Bona, I get to do hanja mara kichazama.
Zamandade zam.
Segebo hanyane.
Eh.
Umzulu.
Umzulu.
Can I just say bravo to Wonga? Because when you asked that question about democracy in Zulu,
Yes.
I had to go on Google first. And what I found there, what was it? Inkululego, it said Inkululego. Well, I don't think they're wrong.
Yeah,
They're
that's
also
freedom.
not correct.
That's freedom. That's not.
Yes, it's freedom.
Yeah.
Because we know it as freedom.
Yes.
But when he said Indande, I was like, yay, that's a Zulu guy.
No, but what about constitutional democracy? Listen to it. Beautiful. Umthetho sisekelo wentando yeningi.
I think that is correct.
Absolutely.
I think it is Umthetho sisekelo wentando yeningi because at church when I was growing up,
Yes.
we used to refer to the constitution as Umthetho sisekelo.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, my grandmother.
And please help me understand, what does that mean? Break it down for me. So I understand intando yeningi, right? I get that it's the preference or that which the majority loves or likes, right? Just break down for me umthetho sisekelo. I get umthetho sisekelo.
Okay. Umthetho, as you know, is
law.
Law.
Yes.
It's sekelo, more of a pillar.
Yes, the supporting structure.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
now look at that, Susan. Look at that. So for me,
Beautiful.
as a communicator, I am now closer, even emotionally, to the meaning of the word constitutional democracy now in isiZulu.
You are
Absolutely.
absolutely right.
Because it's been broken down in its descriptive meaning rather than just its epistemological meaning, if you understand what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Susan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I think that's the first one, but I think, Susan, what stands out in that to me is really what he said in the last portion, how it is broken up.
Exactly.
So in English, we're the pillar of the law to which all the people abide.
Yes. You are absolutely right. And I know Prof. Dolly and those guys in the room who work with pedagogists, they will say exactly that. Break it down into the elements. And what I then see as well is thinking, does it really mean this? This meaning is close, but let me find the right meaning. Yes. So it's working with.
I think our next one is a Sepedi translation.
Constitutional democracy, ka Sepedi, in the Sepedi language, Northern Sesotho, would be ke molaotheo wa puso ya batho ka boitekanelo. Molaotheo wa puso ya batho ka boitekanelo. In other words, equally. Yeah? So there's the concept of equality that is now in the Sepedi version of that term. So the others spoke of the law by
power of the people and the foundational law.
Yes. But in the Sepedi version, according to Muedi Kinder, she says that it's molaotheo, so that the foundational aspect is there for the constitution. Wa puso ya batho, of the governance of the people, ka boitekanelo, equally. See, there's that equally part that enters the fray. Isn't that beautiful? Let's speak to Ate.
So Susan, that being the next one, but again, the variation is now where it was, the pillar to which the majority subscribed. Now the translation focuses perhaps a bit more on the governance as a collective.
Yes.
And the people, in the equal measure. The matter of equality now comes in that did not feature in the Zulu version.
Yes, yes.
And our last one is now on the Sesotho.
Hi, I'm Mzondile.
Hi, Aubrey. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Mzondile. Go ahead, sir.
I'm fine. Okay, good evening to your guests also.
Hello, Daniele.
Hi, Susan. I'm born Zulu, but grew up in the Free State. Got schooled in the Free State of Sesotho as first language. So I will give you the answer for Sesotho.
Wonderful.
So in Sesotho, democracy would be puso ya batho ka batho.
Puso ya batho ka batho. So let's break it down. That means the government of the people by the people.
By the people.
Ah, okay.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Molao Chair. Okay, you're looking actually. I've just given you the definition for democracy. But
Yes.
you're looking for constitutional democracy.
That's right.
So that would be in Sesotho. Then it would start with democracy.
Yes.
So we'd say puso ya batho ka batho e tsamaiswang ka molao cheo, meaning molao cheo being the constitution.
So break down for me Molao Teo. What is that?
Molao cheo is one word, but it's built with two words. Molao being the law,
Yes.
cheo being a what? Maybe I could call that. I'm not sure what I would call that, but it derives from another word, mocheo. Mocheo being foundation.
Ah. So it is the foundational law of so ke puso ya batho ka batho.
Democracy,
Yes. E sebedisang Molao Teo.
Kapa e tsamaiswang ka molao cheo.
E tsamaiswang ka Molao Teo. Oh, it's beautiful. No, I could start singing a song here, man. Isn't it beautiful?
But Susan, you know, what stands out in all of them is that the whole bit about the foundational aspect, the supporting, the pillar aspect,
Yes.
the collectiveness of the people. So the phrase itself might differ, but the origin and where it is collected, that stays the same.
Yes, and I've tried, LaRue, in the chat function to sort of summarize what I call multilingual pedagogy by a la Aubrey Masangu. And these are the steps he went through. And yeah, I just want to sing his praise again. We had no time to talk about what we're going to do in the interview before the time. He simply understood it immediately. And he implemented this with his audience. So unbelievable man, really.
Yeah, like Susan, to me, this just shows, it goes to show that it can be done. It is not something, it takes work and it takes perhaps a lot of effort. And I don't think everyone is as, linguistically talented as Aubrey Masangu, but it is a possibility to be able to develop all these various African languages and not just only adopt a English word into an African language, but to create a new phrase afresh. And I think that's what Dolly and her colleagues obviously do.
Yes, and that's what as Prof. Dolly and those girls or ladies are teaching everyone in the multilingual pedagogy. But think about this again. I was the least multilingual person in that room, but I could at least start that conversation. So that's the other thing I want us to note. It's not as if you must be able to be as good with languages as Aubrey Masangu is, or as Dolly might be, or as, Langa Kumalo might be. As long as you depend on the resources in your class. Remember, our program this week says resources, rights, responsibilities. But if we think about the resources in the class, there will be speakers of those languages in the room who will be able to do what Aubrey has been doing here. And your job as a less multilingual lecturer is to facilitate that conversation and do exactly what you've been doing, LaRue. Document these elements that form part of the definition. And then right at the end, bring it back to English, which you understand, and summarize it in the group. So, but you are right, Aubrey. I think it was just a beautiful example of how it can be done. Yeah.
And I've listened to it time and again. So.
He's so cute. And what I loved is that he highlighted Northwest here. He kept on saying we are from Northwest, etc. So I loved him for that.
Okay, so Susan, on next component, we now go into the language policy.
Yes. And I think, LaRue, we don't need to spend a lot of time on these definitions. Multilingual, we've used when people use 2 or more languages. We talk about societal multilingualism versus individual multilingualism as well. And you will hear words like plurilingual and polyglot, etc. But the words that we are using here in our language policy at Northwest is multilingual, meaning that functional multilingualism is exactly what you have stressed the whole day. Don't use all languages for all functions all the time. We have sets of languages to perform functions, and target language would be those that the university have identified for us to develop. And Robert, right at the beginning today, explained why we are trying to focus on 4 official languages at Northwest at this stage.
Yeah, and to some, we can probably also, in the informal sense, add the notion of additive multilingualism.
Yes.
Where we're contextually relevant, you add, in the NWU context, we have these 4, but where we know a group is relevant to Zulu, perhaps, to include it can be included in a certain context. And it's that flexibility that allows the growth and development to occur.
Yes. Absolutely agree. I want to highlight only 2 slides in terms of the Northwest University language policy, LaRue. This first, because actually I want people to go and read the policy because I think so many lecturers, I think lecturers do go and read it. I don't know if students go and read it very often, but go and familiarize yourself with our policy. But it basically says, and I want to highlight 5.3 and 5.4 on this slide, within the parameters of the principle of functional multilingualism, with English, Setswana, Sesotho, and Afrikaans, these languages are employed as official languages of Northwest. And again, it doesn't mean that everything will be in all 4. It doesn't mean that, we will have every document in all 4. But where possible, we are going to try and use these 4 languages at Northwest. And then 5.4, without diminishing the use of English, Afrikaans, we want Sesotho and Setswana to be developed by the university as languages of communication and of teaching and learning. I should have highlighted both of those. So that's the crux of the matter, as you said, additive multilingualism, additive functional multilingualism, and these 4 languages. The next slide, I think there was one, those 2 things I want to highlight. LaRue, you will speak more about the campuses and the practical implementation in terms of the student life. But that's 6.2, the sensitivity towards language preferences, language needs, language expectations. All of these groups who have an interest in the university. As I say, I don't want to, but the policy is very clear on teaching and learning. If you want to talk a bit about assessment, Dolly and I sit on a committee where we can tell you a bit about what we are thinking about multilingualism and assessment at this stage. But basically developing the 4.
Yeah, and I think, Susan, that sensitivity is a responsibility, and I don't want to use the word perhaps obligation, but a responsibility in that all language speakers have, that when you, if I take this to a very practical level, if we introduce our newcomers annually, our first-year students, there's a certain aspect of sensitivity, and it's sort of the university's role to extend the hand and determine these needs that they might have, and not only assume it's only English because that is easy. I think sometimes a misconception comes in that the policy was seen that everything must be triplicated or made duplicates of. But I think it's not the intention, its entirety. Where possible, such can be done, but it's more about developing, using that which actually will be valuable to a person.
Absolutely. LaRue, and we haven't talked about this, and now I'm jumping something on you. The language, the report of the language directorate, Dokia, your new division, they write a report annually, and I just want to maybe also refer people to that report of 2020, where, and if you don't find that report easily, please contact me or Johan Blau or Dr. Kia so that we can send it to you guys. Because what I want to maybe just conclude with on this formal side, also for teaching and learning and policy is, faculties have very specific plans that they are implementing to develop Afrikaans, English, Sotho, Setswana at our university. And if you haven't read the Language Directorate Report for 2020, do yourself a favor and go and read it. You will be pleasantly surprised at what faculties are already doing.
Yeah.
Amazing work done by faculties.
Yeah, and I think, Susanne, if we then go to the student life environment, and
yes,
these 5, we've now condensed them because this is still the 2018 policy. So we are on a process where Johan and Dr. Kia and yourself, and we are part of the group that now is reviewing the language policy. And I think today is also then the last day that general survey can be completed by staff and students. 13th, yes, it is today.
We must encourage people, please go and do the survey. Yes.
Yes.
It's a every 3-year process. It's normal revision. Quality institutions revise their policies every 3 years. So it's part of that.
So this is still captured in the current policy, but in our student life language plan, we've also gone through a process of review in 2020 now, and though our language plan came into existence at the end of 2019, we saw such development and expansion within the student life setting. So I now look at the student leadership roles, I look at the student governance, I look at the residence life environment. There's been such a change in understanding of multilingualism that was not there, or not at the same level 2, 3, 4 years ago, that we deemed it vital to review our language plan for student life. So we've sort of summarized these into 4, but it focuses primarily on the notion of increasing the access to participation for students from various backgrounds. And then it moves towards that linguistic diversity, celebrating and cultivating the linguistic diversity of your students, naturally the communication component, and then also in how you increase your opportunities for your student. And if you think about the student life component, this is the less formal academic setting. So it is a setting where you develop social skills, personal skills, interrelationships between individuals. So it does allow you a bit more flexibility. Susanne, I don't want to skip over Johan's comments because Johan is usually, he is always a fountain of wisdom. I see he says that the essence is meaning making, grasping the concept by unpacking the source language, which can be English, and then it goes to also unpacking it in other languages, presented within the class, facilitating if you cannot speak to the languages yourself.
Yeah, exactly, Johan. I can't agree more, Leroux, I can't agree more. It's in that intellectual work. We don't think of it as work, but the moment you have to find that other word, pathways in your brain have to search for particular meanings, and that's work. And the more you work with that concept, exactly as Johanna said, the deeper your understanding becomes. So to me, something I'm still thinking about, understanding is not in a language. It's a cognitive awareness that comes in your brain, and languages are used to get there. So Johanna's right.
Yeah. Susanne, I'm not going to go through this slide. We've touched on this. We understand that the plans are there to guide the operationalization of the policy itself. We have this in the academic, the teaching and learning environment, the research environment, and then we now have in the student life, and also in the other administrative and support services are also starting to come to the fore with their own plans. So this is ongoing work that is annually reported by the Language Directorate, and I think this is good work, Susan. This opens up access. This brings the message, I think, home to a lot of people who would otherwise have had limited access
Yes.
or limited understanding at first. Specifically, if you think about our newcomers who might not have, a satisfactory level of proficiency in perhaps English. I think this is good work. This is building work that we're busy with here.
And it welcomes people. Exactly.
Welcomes and includes. Colleagues, I'm going to not go over these. These have been reviewed. So we are here, Susan. I think from a get-go, we should perhaps just indicate that Ms. Nell and Mr. Tom are no longer within the session. They've had two other pressing matters they needed to attend to, but I think Melanie, Lebogang, and Vincent are still with us.
Melanie's electricity has failed, so it's Lebogang and Vincent. Jackie, could you please invite them to the stage?
Because I think, Susan, we won't reflect we will not reflect their portraits necessarily now.
No, we have that. You can go to the next slide, Leroux.
We will speak to the experience.
Yes, those are the questions we've asked Vincent and Lebogang. Oh, Vincent, I'm so glad you are here. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. My camera is not working properly, but I can do it by audio.
Fantastic. You sound very clear. If Lebogang is not in the room anymore, let me just check if I can quickly see him. Lebo. I don't see him at this stage. So Vincent, let's have a little conversation with you. You've now completed a portrait some time ago. What did you like about doing it, and what was difficult?
What I like, it gave me the opportunity to think about language, except for the standard Afrikaans and English. And I'm the candidate that said I want to aspire to learn sign language, and also German as a heritage language, because I was born in Namibia in the Southwest Africa, and many of the farm names and landmarks and songs and things are still in German, and I would like to learn German just to pronounce the German words.
Yes, and so, to have a more authentic pronunciation when you are in that region.
Yes, and then I can understand my family that is still staying there better.
Yeah. Fantastic. I was so glad that you worked with the desired languages. That's great. But you are thinking it helped, or you are saying it helped you to think about languages in a broader way. I get your point, because all of a sudden if you do a questionnaire, it's sort of you are boxed in, but with a portrait, at least there's a lot of freedom, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And Susan, afterwards, I thought I didn't put in any African language as a desired language to learn. Yes. So yes, there's still many room for improvement, or to what is the word, to
advance more languages or become more multilingual,
or to add to my portrait for future.
Yes, absolutely. You raise a very interesting point. One of my colleagues asked me, should she participate in this because she has done a portrait previously? And I was saying to her, but your portrait never stays the same. As you say, when you've added some languages, it will change again. So I actually do portraits regularly. I don't do for myself, because some languages grow and some shrink a bit, but they're all still there. But they take different shapes and different amounts of space on the portrait, I think.
I agree, yes.
So Vincent, I see in Kosinati, he's still under the participants, Leroux.
I think he sent me a private message that they had to to attend to something urgent. So I
So he
think,
had to leave probably. Okay.
yeah.
No, I just don't want to exclude him. And I was wondering if maybe Lebogang never got the link. That's a problem maybe, but I'll follow up with him. Vincent, your views on, you've already touched on feelings and experiences related to the languages that you have on your portrait, but reflecting on that, but also thinking about the Northwest's policy, the multilingual policy. What are your views on that? Do you want to add any views?
Susan, I'm so excited and I'm so positive. The growth and the vooruitgang, what do you call it in
the
English?
Progression or
The progression of Northwest University. You know, it's so wonderful, Susan. If I greet a Setswana mother tongue speaker on campus, sometimes in English, sometimes in Afrikaans, they will respond in their mother tongue. And it's so natural, it's so positive, and there's no issues about language. There's an immediate understanding, there's an immediate respect. They don't have to greet me back in English or Afrikaans, they greet me back in their mother tongue, and that is very positive for me.
So you experience the multilingualism on your campus as something that is growing naturally, and exactly what you're saying. Some people, you respond and you approach in one language and the response comes in another language, and it's a natural
it's a natural development, and it's not forced by policy or rules.
Yeah, you put your finger on an important thing, and you're also a seasoned administrator, so you would know that policies and rules are not always very effective. Bottom-up ways of doing things are sometimes more effective. So,
and I think, Susan, it starts with a mutual respect for each other.
yeah, it does. Yeah, you're quite right. And if we can carry that not only into the language conversations we have, but also the gender conversations, also the race conversations.
Yes, I can't agree more.
Vincent, it was so good to hear your views again. We must touch base. We grew up together as young students. We must update each other a bit. I will get back to you.
Thank you, Susan. Greetings to Bertus and the kids.
The grown-up young people in our respective homes, Vincent. Yes, yes. I will do so.
I know. I remember the kindergarten birthday parties.
Exactly. We were tired young parents, but here we are. We've survived. Thank you, Vincent. Susan. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. LaRue, final thoughts from your side. And we've seen Johan's good notes here on the side as well. Actually, we revise our policies every 5 years, but we are doing the language policy to align with the National Policy Framework for Public Higher Education. Please go and participate in the audit. Your insights, in addition to what we've learned from the portraits, are always helpful to us in terms of the policy.
Yeah. Well, Susan, I think from my side is, I hope we've gained a few more advocates within the multilingual group.
Yes.
The people who have perhaps experienced, perhaps they've only seen, but hopefully experienced the benefit that these portraits can have at a personal level.
Yeah.
But also, seeing the opportunity for what the purpose thereof can be in their work environment, but also in their social environments. Because if I look at the participants, we've dwindled a bit, but it's directors and administrators and UMC members, and some are house parents, some are mentors to student leadership programs. So I hope they also see the value of this methodology that you have, I think, fine-tuned over the years with your research, not only as a self-reflective tool, but also as a tool that we intend to use within the social environment, the transformation environment, building inclusivity and diversity within our university. I look towards the university now. I do not necessarily look outside of the university.
Yeah.
I think this is a valuable tool within our hands that we can use in more ways than one. It's not only a once-off thing. I think it's something that one should reflect perhaps on an annual basis to see how
That's exactly
you've changed,
that.
how have you grown.
Yes, exactly. And obviously if you move to another area of the country or the world for a while, you pick up the languages around you there, or you are exposed to them more, and then those languages grow a bit. But it also helps you, as Vincent has said, it made him remember the German that he had around him as a child. So I think this also helps us to remember the languages that were around us.
And to me, Susan, I recall the first time being exposed to this, you presented it for us. It was a SRC training.
Yes, November 2019 with Pamela and you and I. Yes.
And what that is, I'm quite standard when it comes to language. To me, I use it as a tool, and that is what I use it. I'm a boring person.
Yes, no, you are not, but I get your point about tools.
But what it showed to me, and I think in such a diverse group, it shows the thing that my consciousness after that grew in terms of being sensitive towards others' views on languages, and not, always, because I think we all come from a specific background where you have perhaps a specific set of ideas. Some might be more liberal, some might be more conservative, some might be in the middle. But this to me at least broke that open. You made it open rather, that you can see more objectively around you. And also understand why languages are important to others and not only yourself. And so I think we should tell, it's that you recall that story of the first year student in 2020.
It would be a great concluding story, yes.
Colleagues, when we presented this to first year students in 2020's R&O program, we still had the contact program.
Yeah.
We presented it on the Potchefstroom campus, on the Bell Park, and the My King campus. And it was a session I presented to Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. And the session was then 3 hours long, and it was a manual process. So you could fill it in by hand, and you walk through these 400, 500 students in the large lecture rooms. And after the process, a male student from a very conservative background approached us at the front. I think it was myself and Miss Nell who was still.
I think Sharonika was with you, yes.
She was there, yeah. And he approached us and said he is grateful, in the following context, that where he grew up in Mpumalanga, in a very conservative background with very specific and set racial views and societal views, and a very marginalized type of patriarchal environment. And he said he is now 19 years old, and this was the first time that anyone had pointed out to him the similarities between people of different cultures.
Yes.
And how they use language to point out those similarities, because he had never in his life, in the small community where he grew up, or in the mainstream media that he sees, he was never exposed to the social cohesiveness that language can bring, or that he was only exposed to divisiveness, it would then seem. So, colleagues, I think that's what I would like to stress about this, and why I regard these portraits as absolutely essential, is that they are truly a tool where you and yourself can change. You can change in many ways. But for that student, I think that to me was one of the most valuable contributions we've made.
I absolutely agree.
Open up.
And it took the conversation, you're right, Leroux, away from the political plane, because that was something interesting that you and I experienced in 2020. There were no political conversations. It drew language into the personal domain.
Yes.
And that showed across people's experiences how similar people experience these things. And that is the value of it, to work towards that idea that we share things to a much greater extent. And my concluding thought would just be, so why are we bothering with a multilingual policy? because we are trying to align the resources that people bring with our policy frameworks. And the better we can do that, the more effective learning will be, communication will be in every domain at our institution. So at Northwest, we're not trying to go multilingual because it's cute or sexy. We are trying to do it because it makes sense, intellectual sense, academic sense, social sense. And I hope that we could illustrate a bit of that empirical base for you as well today. But those are my last words, Leroux.
Okay, Susan, I think that is the
We
end.
must say Samaya Handle to everyone. Hope you go safely. Thank you for attending. Vincent, thank you in particular to you who stayed until the end. We appreciate that. And thank you to Jackie and the team. And please attend the rest of the day, or the week rather. Yes. And I'm marketing the Truth and Reconciliation Committee session on Wednesday, where Johan Blau and Lebogang Matibela will speak about being interpreters at that big event in our country's history. And I know there are amazing other multilingual pedagogy events that Dolly and Kweti and Marina and Rosemary have arranged. Can't wait to attend them.
Go well, everyone.
Bye-bye.